Hi everybody, it's low carb and keto friendly nutritionist Amy Berger back for another video with information on how to do keto without the crazy. Before I get into today's topic, I want to remind you about an event that I'll be speaking at live in Lawrenceville, Georgia. I think that's a suburb of Atlanta, so that's Saturday, February 16th. The event is sponsored by the company Adapt Your Life. So if you just type in to search Adapt Your Life Georgia, you should come up with the event. I think you can buy tickets on Eventbrite. So look for that. I'll be speaking. Dr. Eric Westman will be speaking. David Jockers will be speaking. And there's another doctor that'll be speaking, and I don't remember his name. I'm sorry. But that's, a chance for you to come out in the local area if you're in the greater Atlanta area. And you can meet me in person or meet Eric Westman or meet all these other cool keto and low carb, paleo, ancestral type health practitioners. So we'll see you on the 16th of February. All right, getting into the topic at hand. Keto and bariatric surgery. So I mentioned in my previous video when I gave just a little teaser for this one that the main topic today is how keto interacts with bariatric surgery or vice versa, and I encouraged everybody to watch it. I said even if you haven't had bariatric surgery or even if you've lost a lot of weight on keto but it wasn't with the aid of surgery, I wanted people to watch because I think some of what I'm going to say applies to anyone that's lost a very substantial amount of weight or anyone who's on a restrictive diet. I mean, keto in a way is one type of restrictive diet in that we restrict carbohydrates. Other diets might restrict fat, or they might restrict total calories, they might restrict animal foods, what have you. So any version of any type of restricted diet might call for, paying more attention to certain specific issues. So, Got my notes as per the usual, so if I look off camera, I don't mean any disrespect. I'm looking at my notes. Before we get into the specific issues that I want to address sort of some high-level general concepts. And the first is that bariatric surgery is sometimes frowned upon in the keto and low-carb world, even among the professionals. And the reason for that is that many people, even in advance of having the surgery, have to lose a little bit of weight. Like your medical team won't even operate on you until you've shown that you have enough commitment or dedication or whatever to lose 20, 50 pounds, whatever it is. They make you lose some amount of weight before before you're even a candidate for the surgery. And the way that they have you do this is usually with a very low carbohydrate, very low fat, high protein diet. It's something like a protein sparing modified fast. It's the PSMF. It's a very quick, very effective fat loss strategy that's not intended to be used for the long term. I repeat, protein sparing modified fast is not intended for the long term use, but it's very effective in the short term, and you know it if you've done it. Other ways that people can get weight off pre-surgery is with a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet. And the PSMF is a variation on that, but it's also very, very calorie restricted and very, very low in fat compared to a regular ketogenic diet, which is only very, very low in carbs and you can have a lot more fat. But either way, carbohydrate restriction with an emphasis on higher protein is like the silver bullet for losing weight even before surgery. And it's so effective that most of us in the low carb and ketogenic world wish that people would just stay on the diet. Like if the diet is working and the weight is coming off, why would you even have the surgery? Why wouldn't you just continue on this diet that's working without having your intestines rerouted and having your stomach, shrunk and all that? So that's the reason why we sort of question the surgery. Like so many people that have the surgery, perhaps you, if you're watching this and you've had the bariatric surgery in the past, did it because you felt like you tried everything. You exhausted everything. You did Weight Watchers, you did Jenny Craig, you did the cabbage soup diet, you did calorie counting, maybe you even did low carb or Atkins or keto or something like that. And either it never worked or you weren't able to stick with it. And most of us tend to like to believe that low carb works for just about everybody if you stick to it, but it can be very hard to stick to. So it may have been even the case that it was working for you, but you didn't have enough support. You didn't have, maybe even in your own family or your own household, you didn't have a lot of support. Maybe you didn't have a nutritionist or a community of people to help you with meal plans or shopping or just general motivation. Hey, Joe, you're doing great. Hey, Mary, you look fantastic. What are you doing differently? You look amazing. Or you feel amazing. I notice you have more energy, because it's not always about weight, right? So there's a lot of reasons why whatever diet doesn't work, including keto, which we wish everybody would be successful without the surgery. That being said, I personally am not opposed to this surgery. Do I wish nobody needed it? Yeah. Do I wish keto or Weight Watchers or whatever program was effective for everybody every time? Yes. But since that's not the case, I genuinely do believe there is a place for these surgeries. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of people who could be successful on any number of diets, but it's not the food necessarily. It's a psychological thing. There's a lot of food addiction, compulsive eating, compulsive overeating, binge eating. A lot of people who get to the kind of body weight that makes them a candidate for bariatric surgery have very, very painful traumatic pasts. They were abused, neglected, suffered some kind of physical or emotional trauma. Something has led them to consume food in that amount or food of that quality that makes them balloon up to the point of being a bariatric candidate. And those issues don't go away when you go on a ketogenic diet. They don't go away when you go on a low-fat diet. My heart goes out to those people. And in cases like that, or just in cases of food addiction or whatever we want to call it, for some people, the bariatric surgery can be the starting point. It can be the catalyst that forces them to stick to a certain eating plan over the long term because they have to. They have no choice. If they eat too much food or eat certain particular kinds of food that they're not supposed to eat, they will actually get sick. They will literally get sick. They will vomit, they'll have loose stools, they'll have dumping syndrome, something very unpleasant will happen. And so in those cases, surgery sometimes is really what just starts them on the path that they need to be on, and it forces them to stay on it. But of course, we also know that unfortunately, a lot of people regain the weight. Some people regain all of it and then some. Some people start to regain some and they find something that works before they get back to where they were when they started. Of course, this is tragic, right? You've been through a major surgery. You've had a major physical trauma. And here you are, years later, worse off than you were to start with. So we've got to find a way to prevent this from happening or to reverse it, stop it if it's already starting to happen. And, this is another one of those parts besides the food addiction and the binging issues that applies to a lot of people, whether or not you've had the surgery or you're thinking about having the surgery. When you lose, well, let's step one. Somebody that has had bariatric surgery, you literally do not have the same insides as somebody else. You literally do not digest the same way. You don't process food the same way. You don't absorb nutrients the same way. There's different kinds of surgery, right? There's restrictive surgery where your stomach is made smaller, your stomach is not as large as it was, and there's malabsorptive surgeries where they'll actually cut out or reroute parts of your intestine so you're not able to absorb as much of the energy or the nutrients or whatever we get from food. And these different types of surgery can lead to, somewhat different complications and potential problems, but overall they kind of come with some of the same risks. So you have to keep in mind that if you've already had the surgery, you quite literally don't have the same insides, the same physiology as somebody that has not had the surgery. The second thing, and this applies however you've lost weight, if you've lost a very, very substantial amount of weight, whether it was through bariatric surgery or a ketogenic diet or any other method, you are, I don't know how to say this like clearly. In that state, you have to remember you are not a naturally slender person. You're not a naturally thin person. You are an obese person temporarily living in a slender body, and your body will fight you very hard to get back to being bigger. There's a lot of debate about the set point, about whether certain people's bodies just have an inclination to be larger or be smaller naturally. I think there is something to that. And I think there's also something to be said for if you've ever been very, very, very heavy for a very long period of time, for many years. I think your body does get used to that, whether we want to call it a set point or however you want to think about it. I think your body really does get used to that, and it wants to get back to that. So it's almost like that's your natural state or your default state, because that's how you were for so long, that when you have lost such a substantial amount of weight, your body wants to get back there. And it's why it's so hard to keep weight off, right? Many of us, whether we've had the surgery or not, losing the weight is difficult, right? It's not easy, but it's not as difficult as keeping the weight off over the long term. Like, a lot of people can lose weight. The difficulty is in maintaining that lower weight over months and years and decades. So we have to remember, there's a nurse that I follow online who's absolutely brilliant with this stuff. And the phrase she uses is weight reduced obese, meaning if you were somebody that was very, very heavy in the past and you've lost a lot of weight through whatever means you did it, you're not a thin person. You're a weight reduced obese person. You still have the physiology and almost like the hormonal response of an obese person, even though right now your body is much smaller than it was. And I think this is why that carb creep is so insidious. When we start to eat, like, oh, I'll just have a little piece of that. Oh, I'll have a little bite of that. Some people can tolerate that just fine. Some people, that really sets them on the trajectory of regaining weight, because the insulin is still going to shoot up, the glucose is still going to shoot up, so they still have the same hormonal response they had when they were much larger, even though they're thinner. And that doesn't hold true for everybody. There's some people that get down to a much smaller weight and they do have noticeable changes. They have a much higher carb tolerance. That tends to happen in people that work out a lot or that add a lot of muscle mass. So it's like, it's your mileage may vary thing. There's really no blanket statements with this, but that's just something really important for anyone to keep in mind. Like I said, whether you've had surgery or not, if your body is a very, very different size than it was for a substantial period of time in the past, your body's gonna want to go back to where it was. And that's why it's so hard to stay at a lower weight. It's not impossible. It just means you have to be much more vigilant and much more diligent about what you eat and other things that affect, the hormones and how we process food. So with that in mind, do I have anything else to talk about before we move on? Okay. If you've had the bariatric surgery, you understand that that's not a diet. You've had a major surgery, right? This is there's so many complications from this surgery. Some people don't even make it off the table. So this is more than just, oh, I lost a bunch of weight. You lost a bunch of weight because you had a major change to the physical structure of your body. So there's a lot of things that happen because of that. Really, the most relevant issue with regard to being a post-surgery patient is that, and again, I'm saying patient because you are a bariatric surgery patient. I work with clients. Remember, disclaimer, I'm a nutritionist, I'm not a doctor. Anything that I say here is just information. It's not medical advice. I absolutely insist that you confer with and check with your bariatric support team. Hopefully you have one. Hopefully there's a surgeon, a doctor, an endocrinologist, maybe a dietitian that is familiar with the changes that have happened to you internally and can coach you in doing this. I've heard some real horror stories, unfortunately, that there's really not a lot of long-term support for the post-surgery patients. So hopefully you have a good team. But as a nutritionist, for me, the main concerns with post-bariatric clients are nutrient deficiencies, because you're not absorbing the nutrients, right? We have a stomach for a reason, and it secretes acid for a reason. And the main thing that HCl, stomach acid, does is start to break down protein. The vitamins and minerals that are contained in food don't just get absorbed into the body by magic. The food has to be broken down into its components, into its amino acids, into its monosaccharides, into its fatty acids that have to be absorbed, and the vitamins and minerals have to be liberated. If you look at a piece of steak or look at a stalk of broccoli, how are you going to get the stuff out of it if you don't really break it down? And that has to happen in the stomach, and it has to happen in the small intestine. The large intestine is mostly for absorbing excess water and for fermenting stuff that didn't get digested earlier on, mostly stuff like fiber, indigestible cellulose, plant matter. But really, the colon in the large intestine is not affected in bariatric surgery. It's mostly the small intestine, which is where nutrient absorption takes place for the most part. The things that bariatric surgery patients tend to get into the most trouble with are iron and B12, because you really, really need some serious stomach acidity to liberate the B12 and the iron. So a lot of post-bariatric surgery people need B12 injections. It's not even enough to take supplements. Even if you take a sublingual, sometimes you still just won't absorb that nutrient as well, and you actually need injections. Same with iron. You can get iron infusions if you're not able to absorb it from supplements. Some iron supplements cause constipation. There are certain forms you can take that don't do that. I actually take iron every now and then myself. I've had low hemoglobin in the past, even though I eat red meat pretty regularly, but I do have an iron supplement that doesn't constipate. So B12 and iron are the big ones, but they're not the only nutrient deficiencies that happen very, very frequently post-surgery. You can be deficient in almost anything because, again, your body's just not absorbing it the way somebody with a healthy, intact intestinal tract would absorb these things. So it could be zinc, it could be magnesium, it could be calcium. You are at greater risk post-surgery for osteoporosis, bone fractures, like I said, definitely anemia, definitely B12 deficiency. The way around this is probably just supplementation. And again, you might need some injections of certain vitamins, but other than pills, there are forms of liquid vitamins that might be somewhat more absorbable for you, somewhat more bioavailable. There's even powdered vitamins that you can mix in water and drink, and that also might be somewhat more absorbable for you. You would have to check with your medical team to see if that kind of thing is appropriate for you. So something else, and I have something else to say about those deficiencies. I'll get to that in a minute, but other than that, something that might be different for you on keto or on any other diet for that matter versus somebody that has not had this surgery is that you cannot eat large amounts of food in one sitting. And you probably know this only too well. You may have even learned the hard way. You may have overdone it a few times in the past and vomited. But in a way, this is good because you don't want to eat so much. I mean, Dr. Jason Fung calls bariatric surgery surgically enforced fasting. It's a way to force you to eat a lot less because you can't eat so much. And theoretically, hopefully you feel full, you still feel satisfied, you're not hungry all day, but you can only eat very small amounts of food, at least when you're first, in your first period of time post-surgery. You can really only eat very small amounts. So in terms of feasting and fasting, I don't know that I would recommend the 1 meal a day strategy for you. They call it OMAD in the keto world, OMAD, 1 meal a day, or even 2 meals a day, because you're not going to get enough protein in that meal. If you're only eating once or twice a day and you can only eat a small amount of food, you might not get what you need. So I think if you are post-bariatric surgery, you might be one of the few people I would recommend more frequent but very smaller meals throughout the day. And to me, that's really to get enough protein. Protein comes first. If you are post-bariatric surgery, or even if you're trying to lose weight on keto and you haven't had surgery, protein comes first. You fill with protein, you can have, eat fat to satiety and keep carbs very, very low. Dr. Ben Bickman, one of my favorite insulin researchers, he's out of Brigham Young University in Utah. He has a phrase, it's alliteration, which I love. He says, prioritize protein, control carbs, fill with fat. And I would say that that's true for pretty much anyone doing keto, whether you've had surgery or not, but especially if you've had the surgery, I really think you need to prioritize that protein, even if you're only eating a small amount of it at each meal. If you only eat a small amount, but you do that several times throughout the day, I think you'll get the protein that you need to keep your healthy mass, which is what you really want to do. So, what I would avoid really is, I mean, which you will be doing if you're on keto anyway, I would really avoid as much as possible, if not completely altogether eliminate from your diet, at least for some period of time, all grain and all beans. And I grain, G-R-A-I-N, not green, G-R-E-E-N. So sometimes it's hard to hear in the video. Grains like wheat, barley, rice, corn, millet, amaranth, whatever, all that stuff, and beans, because these foods have what we call anti-nutrients. They contain substances that actually bind to some of the vitamins and minerals in those foods that make them harder to absorb. And they do this even in people that have healthy digestion and intact gastrointestinal tracts. So when you have compromised digestive function, I think it's even worse. You want to do everything you can to ensure that you're giving your body the best advantage to absorb whatever nutrients you are consuming. So I would have, and there are certainly keto-friendly foods that also have anti-nutrients. There's a lot of the leafy greens, some of the cruciferous vegetables. There's very few plant foods and vegetable foods that don't have some type of compound that can be problematic. But I would say in general, the beans and the grains are going to be more problematic than the broccoli and the cauliflower, and especially, I mean, eat it cooked. That stuff is a nightmare to digest raw. I can't even chew raw broccoli. Every time I go to a party and I see that like crudité tray with the dip and there's raw broccoli, I'm like, oh, who is eating raw broccoli? The carrots I could understand, the cherry tomatoes I could understand, the celery, raw broccoli? Not to mention, it's gonna get in my teeth, and if I'm at a party, do I really want to have like bits of broccoli in my teeth that I don't know about and nobody's gonna have the guts to tell me? So anyway, the point is, you probably, as a post-bariatric surgery patient, also want to eat your food very well cooked. Raw plant matter is not that easy to digest. And even when you cook meat, you might want to cook it very, very well. Have things like ground beef instead of like a big tough steak, or, cook like stew meat or oxtails or things that are very gelatinous, things that are very soft. Put them in a slow cooker, put them in the pressure cooker, let them break down and get soft and tender and just easier to chew, potentially easier to extract nutrients from further down in the GI tract. You might, again, consult with your medical care team. Depending on the surgery you've had and depending on whatever issues you might be experiencing, you might benefit from HCl supplementation. It's hydrochloric acid. It's basically some stomach acid in a supplement that you can take. They also sell ox bile supplements. Now, you wouldn't have had your pancreas removed, so your pancreas, sorry, why am I saying pancreas? Gallbladder. The gallbladder produces bile, but just because of the way your intestines have been changed and rerouted, your bile output from the gallbladder might not be, or did I say that the gallbladder doesn't produce the bile? It holds the bile. The liver produces the bile. Sorry, I'm talking too fast and I'm getting discombobulated. The point is, the output of your bile, the timing and the amount of secretion might not match up with the food you're eating. So to take a supplemental bile might be helpful, but again, you'll have to check with your bariatric dietitian or your doctor. Now, one thing I do want to address, I'm already at 23 minutes, but this is an important issue. I hope there's a lot of you watching that these issues might apply to and that this is helpful, so I'm not going to cut this short. Bariatric surgery comes with increased risk, not only for the anemia and the B12 deficiency and the osteoporosis and the bone loss, but for things like anxiety, depression, alcoholism, and suicide. So before I go on, if you've had bariatric surgery, or if you haven't, if you are just a human being trying to deal with life, and you have any plan to hurt yourself, or you have considered suicide, please get help immediately. Turn this video off immediately and call a suicide hotline or call 911. I want you here. We can't afford to lose you. So take care of yourself and get help. Beyond that, if I had to guess as to why some of these things happen, a lot of these things can be direct or indirect results of the nutrient deficiencies. If you are B12 deficient or iron deficient, you're going to be fatigued. The B12 deficiency alone can cause cognitive impairment. It can cause anxiety. It can cause depression. It can cause neurological symptoms if you start losing balance, if you get uncoordinated. The B12 deficiency can cause any number of weird, sort of unexplained, odd symptoms. And if you're not absorbing certain fatty acids well, if you're not absorbing DHA, but also the B12, but any nutrient, B1, B2, B3, folate, any of these things, all of that stuff is really important for mental health. The brain doesn't function in a vacuum. Healthy brain function, healthy cognition, healthy moods don't happen in a vacuum. We need even the protein, right? All those like feel-good chemicals and neurotransmitters that we always hear about, serotonin, dopamine, all these reward chemicals are made out of amino acids. They're made from the breakdown of protein products. So we need to be digesting the protein. We need B6 as a cofactor in some of the enzymes that make those neurotransmitters. So all of these things sort of interact to build not only the physical structure of the body, your muscles and your bones and your organs, but the chemical messengers and signaling molecules like hormones and enzymes and neurotransmitters. Somebody who's B12 deficient or zinc deficient, it doesn't surprise me that they have depression or anxiety or even are drawn to alcohol. And other than that, the physical causes of these problems, or potential physical causes of these problems, there's sort of the psychological gap between the expectation you had for how this surgery would go and how your life would be affected versus the reality of what's actually happened. You may have approached the surgery thinking, I'm going to get this weight off and my life is going to be magical, everything's going to be better. And some of that might have happened. You might have much more mobility now, you might have more energy, you might be able to participate in activities that you weren't able to do before, like going to a restaurant with your family and sitting in a booth, or sitting in a movie theater seat, or being able to go on rides at amusement parks where before maybe you couldn't even fit in the seat. So, there's a chance that a lot of that has happened, but there's a chance it hasn't, because maybe you haven't lost as much weight as you expected, and that can be a huge disappointment when you've probably spent a fortune and, like I said, had your insides cut apart. And if you're not getting the result you expected to get, that can be really devastating. So another outcome of that could be relationship changes, right? And again, this applies not just to people who've had bariatric surgery, but to anyone who's lost a very significant amount of weight, or anyone who changes dramatically in any other way. If you could have taken up another hobby, learned a new language, got into something else in your life, that you have upset the status quo with people in your life, whether it's a spouse or a significant other, a sibling, friends, coworkers, whoever. They have you pegged as you're this person, you're, whoever you are, you're the fat friend, you're the funny one. Well, I might be big, but at least I'm not as big as so-and-so. So they have you labeled as one particular thing. And now you've stepped out of that and you're not that person anymore. Now you've lost 50 pounds, 100 pounds, 200 pounds. You think completely differently. You act completely differently. They feel threatened. That's not your problem. That's their problem, that you've upset their status quo. They don't know what to do with you anymore. They don't know what label to give you. Your significant other might be nervous because all of a sudden other people are finding you attractive, where you were probably beautiful all along. Let's be clear about that. You were probably beautiful, handsome, sexy, hot, whatever you want to call it, all along. But now other people are noticing, and that's shaky ground for your significant other. They're wondering, are you going to start to stray? Are you not going to want them anymore? So there's a lot of emotional stuff caught up in this, not just with you as the post-surgery patient, but all the people you interact with closely in your life. There's another issue too. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people who get to the size point where they're a candidate for bariatric surgery have very traumatic pasts. And they eat to comfort, to fill that hole, whatever we want to call it. There's a reason that they seek refuge in the food. And for those people, when they do lose a very significant amount of weight, they might now be getting attention from the opposite gender or whatever gender they happen to be attracted to, and it makes them very uncomfortable because it's very scary and it's very threatening and it's bringing up a lot of that stuff. So it's totally understandable. There's this huge psychological piece that I think is addressed to some extent in your pre-surgery counseling, but it's in some cases probably not addressed well enough. And like I said, just even with the diet piece, the recipes and the meal planning, plus the psychological piece, there's really not enough long-term ongoing support. So I think there's a lot of reasons why the weight regain happens. I think there's a lot of reason why the pull toward alcohol happens, and the pull maybe towards self-injury and self-harm happens. And of course, the deficiencies, like I said, when you are deficient in these nutrients, and it's not something that happens right away, but over months and especially years, those nutrient deficiencies can most definitely affect your physical and mental and emotional health. So all I can really say is be proactive. Keep an eye on yourself. Get your levels checked now and then. Check in with a doctor or a nurse practitioner or some licensed medical professional who's well versed in supporting people post-bariatric surgery. Track how you feel. You don't have to write down every single thing you eat, but maybe keep a little journal, get a little notebook, write down how you're feeling emotionally, mentally and physically. See if you can start identifying trends. And if you start to slip down, you can be proactive and do something about it before it becomes really, really awful and terrible and dangerous. Like I said, check in with your doctor, get some of these nutrient levels evaluated every few months. I'm not sure how frequently to recommend, but that's something you can check with your care team. That's it, I guess. I'm over 30 minutes. I didn't think this was going to be such a long one, but I hope that helps. I know there's a lot of other issues that I didn't talk about, but just as a nutritionist, these are really the only issues I can speak to at all. Always work with your licensed healthcare medical professionals when you're in one of these situations. But again, I just want to repeat, there is some sort of bad-mouthing and poo-pooing of bariatric surgery in the keto world, and I certainly think it should be the absolute last resort. You should exhaust all potential possibilities, including a well-formulated low-carb or ketogenic diet with the help of a nutritionist or a doctor or a dietitian who's well-versed in this stuff. Don't just like half-ass it. Don't try to do it without support. If you think you need support, get a coach, get somebody you can check in with once a week or however often. So I don't judge anyone poorly for having a surgery, really. Like I said, this can be the start of change. This can be the catalyst that somebody needed to change that they weren't able to change on their own. So whatever you need to get your life back into your hands, do it. Thanks for watching my videos. If you're looking for a nutritionist, I am seeing clients. You can find that on my website, tuitnutrition.com, T-U-I-T nutrition.com. I think there's a tab that says work with me or services. You'll be able to see information on my consultations there. But there's many, many other keto-friendly nutritionists and dietitians out there. It might not seem like we exist, but there's plenty of us. And I wish you the best, because I know that surgery was not an easy choice, and it probably was your last resort. You probably did exhaust what you thought were all the possibilities to the best of your ability. And so just welcome to keto, or keep doing it if you've already been doing it for a long time. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're having success. If you're not, feel free to contact me. If these videos help, if they're educational, please subscribe to the channel and feel free to share these videos on your social media. And I guess that's it. Until next time, remember, catch us in Lawrenceville, Georgia on February 16th, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.